So I did that video yesterday about the tour of where I grew up, which normally that would make a little bit more sense in like a suburban area or something, but like I'm basically just showing buildings, so I don't know how much that translated. And I realized something that people are going to immediately think if they're watching that video, and it did go slightly into the algorithm. So in other words, I think that 2 or 3 people or something that aren't subscribed saw that video, and I don't know. I don't check the stats on my videos unless they get at least like 100 views, and then I'm sort of interested. And also it might not even show you anything anyway because it'll say like you have so few views that there's not enough data or something like that. But so I know that one thing that's going to occur to people is that, oh wow, this guy's pathetic. This is like a nostalgia video about these days of his youth when he was, happier and had more hope for the future. So that's fine. No one commented that. I don't even really know if people are thinking that, but I think that that's one of the things that you would think, someone watching that video. And what I'm saying is I'm aware of that. I didn't want it to seem that way. That's not what I wasn't trying to make it depressing or anything like that. But I really deeply miss the city and the 90s. So that's all I was really expressing. It wasn't about trying to look pathetic or even saying that the past was better. I don't really want to live in the past. I mean, in a way, how could you really even do that? Like I'm worried about my employment situation and my insurance situation. So these are things that I have to think about, But I think I'm going to do another one of those just because I thought it was kind of fun to do. And because it got 13 views or whatever it was, like I said, it went into the algorithm slightly, So I think I'm going to do another one of those, and maybe I'll be able to do a slightly better job because I already did that one. But again, like I'm not trying to bring anyone down, and I'm not trying to come across as pathetic and, obsessed with the past. It's just something that I think about somewhat, and so I wanted to make a video about it and just talk about like this is as Chad Kroeger would say, this is where I grew up. And I think that's what he says. And just make a video talking about it. And to be honest, I don't think I did a great job because instead of it didn't really encapsulate the feeling that I had. It was just sort of like me showing different buildings and stuff, which isn't going to mean that much to the viewer, It almost might be better if I just talked about it. But I tried, well, that's what I was sort of trying to express. Anyway, but I wanted to talk specifically about something related to Kurt Cobain and his a video about him that I watched, maybe against my better judgment because it's a little bit of a downer, but and it had a compelling title. That's partly why I watched it, and it was a good little sort of documentary the type of thing you see on YouTube, and it was called The Paradox of a Generational Icon. So this has happened a number of times now, so I just wanted to make a video talking about something that I don't hear people talking about, even though it's public information, and it's extremely relevant to his self-deletion. You have to use these stupid words because of the way YouTube is censored and stuff like that, and you can't use a certain word, but it's obvious what I'm talking about. But so this guy was basically saying at the end of this video, it became like this somber tone. The whole video had a somber tone, but it became more explicitly somber, and it's sort of talking about Kurt Cobain was seen trying to disguise himself in the last days of his life, wandering around, his Seattle home or whatever. Was that technically Seattle? I think it might have been a suburb of Seattle where they had that house. But anyway, either way, you know what I'm talking about. So like he was kind of seen wandering around wearing a hunter's hat and sunglasses, attempting to be anonymous, but apparently I guess it didn't really work. If we know this now, and that he had a sort of a vaguely homeless look about him and just kind of looking lost or whatever. And the video basically said the video contends he made the decision to end it all, something like that. So the way I think about the world is like we all influence each other in ways that we don't really even consciously realize. That's something that I believe. And I don't even think anyone would argue against it. There's nothing controversial about saying that. I think I've mentioned this before, but so I think the day that he did that he did what he did, I'm saying I think it was the day, but it might have been the day before, but I think it was the day. And because I read this Mark Lanegan book, and I could even look it up, but I remember it well enough to remember what I'm talking about, So what happened was that Mark Lanegan was on heroin at that time, and he was in his apartment, which was it was like a tenement, it was like in a bad part of town. It was he was not in a good place in his life at that time. And he was deeply into drugs, like the way that a drug addict would be, like, in other words, I just want to keep getting high type of thing, that type of mindset or whatever. And that day, April 4th or April 5th, he got, because back then you had answering machines, and I did this in another video where I was talking about that, but I miss answering machines because they're just so much less intrusive to me than having voicemail. But anyway, so on his answering, and if you know about answering machines, generally the phone rings, it goes to an answering machine, and then you hear the message that the person is leaving in real time, It records, so if you're not there, then you play it back, but you can hear it when it's being recorded. And so that day, Kurt Cobain called him at least twice. I don't remember that part. It might have been 3 times. And he said on the answering machine something to the effect of, "I'm in town. Do you want to come over and listen to some records or, just hang out or whatever?" And Mark Lanegan ignored his messages. And see, I think it was very... I don't want to say brave, but because it was after the fact, but like that does not make Mark Lanegan look like a good person. The whole book doesn't really make him look like a good person, and that's partly why I thought it was such a good book, because it was so hard on his sleeve or whatever. He was exposing himself. So, but Mark Lanegan said he heard that message. And he was Kurt Cobain had 2 best friends, Mark Lanegan and Dylan Carlson. I think that's basically what it was like to the extent that he had like a best friend. It was like either Mark Lanegan or Dylan Carlson, and he looked up to Mark Lanegan on some level, which is a little bit weird, but that's just, people have relationships that aren't, the dynamic isn't necessarily obvious on the outside, But, so he called him and said, do you want to come over? And Mark Lanegan, he didn't respond, and he said in the book that when he would come over, and now I'm not trying to make Courtney Love look bad. It's not something that I'm not thinking about that. But it's part of the thing. So he, I don't know how many people listening to this already know this, but I'm just going to say it anyway. So he said that when he would visit Kurt Cobain at the house, that and Courtney Love was there, that Courtney Love would do this thing of like flirting with Mark Lanegan. In a way, it's like kind of like playful to annoy Kurt Cobain, but it did annoy Kurt because he was like sensitive or whatever, and he would get basically visibly upset. I don't know to what extent, but and so Mark Lanegan was basically he had the assumption like, oh well, what if Courtney Love is there? That's what he said in the book anyway, and that he didn't want to deal with that, and he only would have wanted to see Kurt. And the other thing was he was just basically saying he was in a drugged out haze, and he just didn't want to like do anything. He just wanted to lay around and shoot heroin, I guess, or whatever, or be in the state of being high. And so what I'm saying is you have this situation where people are sort of like assuming that, he may have made a tentative decision, like especially like asking Dylan Carlson to buy a gun, probably, and he had something else in mind instead of what he told Dylan Carlson, like, which is that he needed a gun for protection or whatever, which is pretty plausible if you're a high profile figure, like it's not that unbelievable. And so Dylan Carlson bought him the gun. And but this video is basically making the assertion that Kurt Cobain was wandering around, he looked sad, he looked lost, he had made the decision to end it all or whatever. I'm not sure I agree with that, because he called Mark Lanegan probably on some level to reach out to a friend and talk about what he was upset about, because people knew about, Kurt Cobain wasn't exactly shy about talking about how he felt about stuff, so people kind of knew what was going on. I got distracted because my cat stepped in front of me. But I always walk while I'm doing these videos, which is another habit of mine. I'd love to sort of be less nervous, I don't really know how. Well, recently my doctor said I should try valerian root, so I think I'm gonna try that, and it's like in a tincture, liquid form. So, but anyway, yeah. So I don't agree with that. I don't know that, and I think it's an important point to make, because people influence each other in all sorts of ways that, like I said, people don't even necessarily realize. The way I think about it is, and I said this about King Cobra JFS, I don't, it's sad, but it's like there's a part of me that thinks, well, that's the way it was going to go because of who that person, how he was as a person, So I'm not really saying that, the history would have been different and Kurt Cobain would be alive and he'd be like happy and he would have had another kid or whatever. I don't know. But I do know that Kurt Cobain, according to Mark Lanegan, called him at least twice that day, reaching out to him. And subsequent to that, Mark Lanegan realized why, but he kept it to himself for a very long time, for obvious reasons. But yeah, so I just wanted to say that because I keep seeing various, videos and stuff related to Kurt Cobain and talking about what happened toward the end and stuff, and I don't hear people mentioning this, which to me I would think, it's in a book that has sold many copies. I really don't know how many copies. But so in other words, at this point, it's public information that Kurt Cobain reached out to Mark Lanegan probably the day that he did that, And so for people to leave that out is a little bit strange to me. And I do think if Mark Lanegan had decided to go over there, that he may not have done that at that time. Obviously. I mean, you don't know, but it's very possible that, and he had this very close relationship with Mark Lanegan, and I don't mean that in a gay way. I just mean like he had this connection, with him. So he was reaching out to this one person who he obviously wanted to talk to, and Mark Lanegan chose to ignore it because he must not have. I mean, I think if he knew what was going on in Kurt Cobain's head, I think he would have visited him, and would have answered the call, obviously. I think. So no, I don't think there had been some sort of definitive decision in Kurt Cobain's mind. And how would anyone know that anyway, That's about all. Thanks for listening.